Hi everyone, I'm Will. This is Will the Artist, and today we're going to talk about making a track. People have a lot of names for it: making a beat, making a groove, whatever it is, whatever you want to call it. That's what we're doing. So dive in. This is actually the track you're listening to right now. Is going to be the final product. So I'm going to show you how to make this track, make this groove, step by step how I did it. You don't have to do it this way. I'm just showing you my process. So come on in. Alright, so I'm going to do a little adjusting here. Let's see. I like the idea of not hearing the piano at the beginning because I like this. I like this. I want to hear this first by itself. So I've made that decision, so I want to back this up. But I also need to get more of this action. So the way I have this set up is so cockamamie. It's so just random. But it's fine because I'm making music and I'm an artist and I can do whatever I want because it's my music, right? It's how we should feel. We should feel a little pride with our stuff. So it's like, yeah, I'm doing this for you to watch, but it's also kind of like I'm doing this the same way I would do it without somebody watching. So I think that's kind of the advantage of what I'm trying to do with this channel. Sorry for keep hitting this mic. I need to get a better setup. I keep grazing the cord. That's that sound. Basically, with this channel, I just want to make it so it's like, here's some insight into somebody that makes music. And hopefully somebody else that wants to make music or already does make music, gets inspired by seeing me make music. So that's all I'm trying to do. Kind of show you my process, and yeah, like that's pretty much it. So I'm back the next day. This is a day later from when I recorded all this. This is just an Omnisphere thing here. I bounced this MIDI in place, so it's just this bass track which we can hear by itself. Let's listen. It's like a 60s retro bass from Omnisphere. Trillion, actually. It's from Trillion. Just me playing it in. And then we got a little funk groove, this little part. The hi-hat and snare are from a drum loop, but I added in my own kick because I kind of want more with my bass. And then I have this piano part, which I'm going to actually add and move back because, like I said, I want to have it a little more, just kind of give it place to breathe. You know what? As I say that, I kind of want to bring back either the bass or the drums too. So I want to start with just one instrument and then kind of build. That's kind of what I'm feeling right now. So I don't think starting with drums alone would make sense. Yeah, it sounds too like rockabilly. I think the bass alone kind of cool. Maybe just kick alone. You know what? I kind of like the idea of doing kick alone. Alright, so let's get rid of this. Let's go back to the MIDI. And the reason I do that is because it saves CPU. This little bar here, when it starts going wild, that's when you're going to get a system overload. And this even thing kind of turns red on you. It's like the computer freaking out. It's kind of like the computer being like, I'm doing too much. Stop. Just stop it with all your stuff. You're trying to record this and you're trying to run everything. And it's like, I have a computer that's powerful, but I don't have one that's powerful enough to handle everything I want to do. So sometimes you got to get a little creative on that level too. I found that getting creative in tech is sometimes just as important as being creative with your music, especially as a producer, because sometimes you're not going to be able to just throw money at everything and solve it. But you got to realize how much you're asking your computer to do when being a producer, especially in the box. When people say in the box, they mean in the computer. That's meaning that we're playing something that exists inside the computer. So, for example, Omnisphere, all these virtual instruments that I'm playing through MIDI, the MIDI is just acting as a piano scroll, and every time this MIDI appears, you're asking this channel, that program, to play. It's playing, like it's firing the samples at which this MIDI scroll is telling it to fire. So if we look at this MIDI scroll, each one of these keys is assigned to a sample. So this samples the kick drum, this sample, so the D, C1, this bottom key down here on the piano, that is firing this kick drum, because you can see I activated, it's hitting that. I don't have it selected, so it's not firing, but here, that's the kick drum, right? So this is assigned to the snare. You can also assign these excuse me, you could also assign these pads too, and that's all done in your the application that comes along with your MIDI controller usually, or there's assignability in Logic as well. But point is that every time this piano scroll's going, it's firing all of these things. So the computer's doing that work. It's firing all these little different things. So that's a bit of CPU. Then it's also firing the piano. It's also, I bounced this, so it's not doing this. It's just taking this as audio, which is relieving the CPU a little bit. But I want to go ahead and change something about this MIDI. So I when you bounce it in place like this, it mutes it, so it's not playing, and it just plays the audio. So you can mess with the audio a little bit and save yourself CPU. But I'm going to go ahead and change a little bit of it because I want to have a little bit of an intro. So what I'm going to do is not move it off in place. I'm going to just copy it. Oh, where did it go? It went down. Okay. Copy it. All right. So my plan is to change it a little bit. So what I want to do is kind of start with, so I just copy and pasted. So basically what I've done at this point is just copy and paste everything. Now, if you're a true beginner, the best thing to know is the Command Z. It will undo all your mistakes. Watch. So I could just delete this. Like, oh no. Command Z. It's back. Command Z. It saves everything. It's like the first thing you'll learn. So if I got you that early, welcome. I've got this little project going, right? And I'm basically going to go ahead and take out I want to kind of intensify what I'm doing. So I'm going to take out the snare and the hi-hat. These are all hi-hats. These are two different hi-hat samples. So one's kind of like a hit one way. So, and then it kind of makes a difference. And you can see how all these, so the colors represent how hard the velocity is. So if you click on one of these, it'll open up the velocity thing. So the strength, it's out of 172. Don't ask me why, but that's the velocity right here. So it feels more realistic if it's not all the same velocity. So drummers kind of naturally play like that. So they go tick, 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 tick. So they have an accent and then an off accent. So they have one that's a little harder, which is 64 velocity, and you have 16. But what you can't do is turn it up or turn it down. So 127 is the highest. So that's the highest you can hit it. That's like hitting it as hard as you can, all the way down to 1, which is very light, as light as you can be. So that's velocity, and that's MIDI. That's part of the MIDI control. Basically, this is just an advanced piano scroll. So instead of just telling the piano exactly what note to hit, it's telling it the velocity. You can also swing MIDI, so how far off the beat it is. So if it's heavily swung, it's going to be very behind the beat. So it's going to kind of sit behind the beat. Whereas if it's no swing at all, it'll be straight up right on it. I don't know what that is affecting right now, but if you just kind of select something and hit the Q, that'll quantize it to whatever is selected here. You can even go down to the type of the scale type and what key you're in and quantize here. So when you hit Q for this, you're actually just quantizing this box. This black line is the differentiator, and then same thing for this, and then the velocity is just whatever I've selected. You can pull it up. So that's kind of how MIDI scroll works when you have that open, this editor window in Logic. But that's only available if you see this scroll. If you have just audio like that, you don't have that ability. What you can do is actually, I'll tell you in a later video, but you can actually change the audio from audio to MIDI. And Logic basically just takes your audio sample and turns it into a MIDI, because it can do that. It can take the pitch, can take the length, can take the velocity, and turn it into a MIDI note. It can do that with the voice. It can do that with anything. So we can get into that later. But right now what I'm doing, I guess I keep freaking talking and go on forever, is taking out a little bit of this. So let's see what, I'm going to mute these drums and see what I really want to start hearing stuff after I hear that first bass note. Let's see. I think it needs a kick drum like right away. So I'm just going to kind of take out for the first 4 bars, take out the hi-hat and take out the snare. I'll just take out the hi-hat and the snare for the first 4 bars. Let's see. It's a heavy ass snare. See, sometimes if the snare's a little heavy and it's not like it's not a good sample for me, it's kind of like not feeling what I'm feeling, I highlight them all. See, it's at 108. That's like really hot for me. I like a nice little bouncier snare, especially for what I'm doing, like the groove I'm trying to complete. So take a little bit off that snare there. Let's see what that sounds like. Just, yeah, it's a little friendlier. It's like really attacking up here. Yeah, that's too intense for me. I'm trying to like be a little more chill. So yeah, that's a little like bouncier. Like less in my face. You know? Ooh, that's really loud. Okay. So let's go focus. I have a little bit of ADD, so please excuse me. I will go off. Alright, so let's see what it sounds like. Just bass and kick. Ooh, do not like that first kick. It's gotta land. I gotta hear bass first. This pattern does not work alone. Maybe I'll play in something else. Let me play in something else. Sometimes you just gotta play it in yourself, you know? Whatever if you want to hear something, you gotta hear it. I think it needs to be a little more consistent underneath, so let's see. Yeah, it needs a little more uniformness right at the beginning. Then I can go into my like more like off style, where it sounds a little more human to me. So alright, cool. So it's a little cooler. I think I messed that up, so let me try to quantize or redo. What the hell was that? Some other kick in there? Oh, I'm hearing. I'm confused. Am I hearing the audio of it? What the hell was that? Sometimes you just hear random things in your mix that you don't know where they came from. So it must be in here, right? Am I going crazy? I hear another type of kick. Oh, yeah, maybe I clicked it. I must have. It must have been me. No, there's not another MIDI in here. I'm so confused. Oh, it's this. It's just that when it's really quiet. Alright, that was so confusing. Alright, so when the velocity is all the way down at a 3 or a 9 here, because I accidentally kind of double tap, it doesn't have that same like resonance with it. So basically what they're doing, think about it like this. So if these are different samples going up, right, I have this note is the kick, and this is a snare, and then what was the 2 hi-hats? 2 hi-hats are on top of the... So you just wanted to do something, you just kind of go back and you can create little grooves and just kind of play them both notes. When you play hi-hats, it would be weird if it sounded the same. It sounds more rhythmic. It sounds more robotic when everything is the same. You need it to be different. So what I'm trying to say here is as different as these two are, within this sample, the velocity changes the sample. So because this kick drum right here, we have a velocity of 3 and 9, it doesn't just change in volume. So when you pull down the velocity on this, we'll watch it. Once it turns, let's see what the range is. See how it's a different sample now. We don't have that like resonance of the other thing when we're up here. Let's see. I think when it gets like 100. Yeah, it just gets more resonant. So what they do is they actually have, it's the same kick drum, but just turning up the velocity on it will change the sample. So based on how hard I hit this, the computer's reading how hard I hit this. So it's putting it at a message to the computer. Same thing with this. Everything I click, the computer's reading how hard I hit it. So if I hit it really hard, as hard as I can, it's at the 127 velocity. But if I hit it nice and quiet, or as light as I can, it's like at 1 or 2 velocity. So the computer's reading my input. That's why it's playable. And depending on what I play in, it will change the sample that's actually playing. So the better the sample library, the better instrument you're playing. So I really like addictive drums. I think they're great. Same thing with Keyscape. What they do is they change the sample that's coming out of the key based on the velocity you're playing. And something like Trillion, which is really cool, what that does is when the sample is being played and you go, say, from a C and you take it a full octave up, it does what a bass player would do when it was playing an octave to an octave. It interprets based on your playing style what sample it's going to give you. And it's just the ability of MIDI now is so unbelievable. And it's just exciting. I just want you guys to get excited about it too, because a lot of what we listen to is MIDI. And I think people hear MIDI and they just kind of like scratch their heads. They don't really know what it is. They kind of think about probably like crappy like electronic music, and not crappy electronic meaning like trap. Like I like every genre of music. I think that it's hard to be somebody that tries to create music and put yourself in a box of saying that I don't like that genre. I think it's hard to do because you're limiting yourself no matter what. It's like kind of taking a personality type or and just saying I don't like them. You, as an artist, you should be open, and as a producer, you should be open, because you never know, first of all, what kind of like gig or client you're going to get, because say it's somebody that's out of your realm, but they want to work with you because they've heard what you've done and they want an element of that. You should still be able to bring your element to that. You should never say, oh, I just work in the box with trap, or I just work exclusively with singer-songwriters and acoustic guitar and vocalists. As an artist, you should be open to anything, because music it's universal, and if you truly listen, you can really hear where the person's coming from. I know this is going to sound weird, but anything that was recorded in the 60s, man, it had a different vibe to it. I think the recording studio was a really cool place back then. It was still a spaceship. It was still a place where people did, like, it was a pioneering area, because they had just gotten out of recording big bands with two microphone inputs, and they finally got the ability to overdub and track. And these are the first humans that are out there recording themselves in an audio space that's going to be like capsulated forever. It's going to be like put in, and I can't lie, a part of me tries to capture that a lot. Like, I love that sound. There's something, and that's my comfort food. I mean, the Beatles, Simon and Garfunkel, Joni Mitchell, the Beach Boys. I mean, even the Rolling Stones to an extent. It's because my parents loved them. This is obvious that my parents were born in an age where specifically my father, loved these bands, and I grew up with these bands, listening to them, because we're so influenced by our society and our culture around us, and our parents, and the people that raised us. And what those people listened to is influential on us, whether we rejected it or accepted it, because that seems to be the thing, right? We either rejected it and we said, no, I'm going to like my own music. And that's what a lot of these guys that were in the 60s, that were John Lennon and Paul McCartney and Keith Richards, they were all rejecting their parents. This was rock and roll, man. Rock and roll turned into a lot of different things, but at that time, this was like, they were against the man. This was not, no, people thought this wasn't music. They said, this isn't music. What is this? In a very similar way that people look at trap music right now, or that people look at, people looked at hip hop. People still look at hip hop in that way. It's kind of weird. But genres are so special because they all have a birthplace. They all have a time and a place, and their story's messy. It's like a family. It's like knowing a person. And that's why music just connects to me so much, because it's alive. And even when people are, I'm looking at a picture of, you can't see it because it's off the camera, but I got a picture of the Beatles right here. And John Lennon's been dead for, oh my God, almost 50 years? And he's still alive. Like, that sounds so weird, but I can go listen to him. He exists on a bunch of records. I could get bored of listening to John Lennon because he recorded himself. He put himself down. And to me, that's like exciting. Having the ability to record yourself, and get yourself down somewhere. And I just think it's special. I think it's cool. I mean, I look at George Martin a lot, and he was really had an amazing perspective on the recording studio, because he saw it as a place that, you can manipulate sound. They were some of the first people to start reversing themselves with audio. The Beatles, meaning George Martin and the Beatles. George Martin is the reason the Beatles started reversing themselves and started walking around with little handheld recorders where they would record themselves and go. And that's why Sgt. Pepper is one of the best albums of all time. I mean, that birthed this entire renaissance of the recording studio that's still happening, to the point where I'm sitting in my home studio and I'm getting chills because I'm thinking about the idea that it all kind of started there. And the coolest part to me is, as a kid, I didn't know any of this. I just blindly loved their music. I blindly loved John Lennon. I loved listening to the Beatles play music. It was a genuine thing for me that I didn't have anything to relate it to. I just loved it. And I loved it because I associated it with being with my father. I associated it with traveling with my dad. I would always listen to the Beatles and the Beach Boys. And so these songs are nostalgic for me. But then I go to music school, and I study audio and music production in music school, and I realize, wow, the Beatles, they're a really influential group on music. They kind of birthed this thing that made the recording studio a cool place to be. Now, I'm not saying people didn't go in the recording studio prior to this and make it cool, but what they did was they turned it into a tool. They turned it into something where I can now open a project in Logic. The 4 or 5 of them walking into that studio is what the equivalent of that right now for me is walking into my studio and firing up a Logic session. And these tracks right here are tape. It's just that we've digitized them. We've made, instead of recording through this microphone and going into a tape machine, and you can manipulate the tape. There was things you could do with it, like we're learning. You can reverse the tape. You can speed it up. You can slow it down. You can do a bunch of things to manipulate the tape, and that's how the Beatles got something like Sgt. Pepper. And all it took was a creative brain like George Martin and a talented band like the Beatles with their songwriting to team together and create this idea of what the recording studio, what I really truly believe, without them we wouldn't look at the recording studio in the same way. because what they did was they used it as a tool. They were able to learn the recording studio through George Martin and how it works and what microphones do what and how to make certain sounds. And not only in the music creation realm, but just in your everyday life. Walking around, I mean, Paul recorded himself laughing, and that's in part of A Day in the Life. There's so numerous. If you just go back and listen to any of those records past Sgt. Pepper, actually I believe there was one right before that too. But Sgt. Pepper was kind of that one where it all kind of melded together. They were able to not be on tour anymore. And they were really able to dedicate a lot of their life to the recording studio. And in entering that studio, they realized this is such a creative space, and this is where I want to be as a musician. On tour and being in front of live musicians, it's great and it's fun. Excuse this, like, euphemism or whatever it is, but it's kind of like a cheap fix. Whereas to me, this is just how I think. I love live music. Do not get me wrong with this. But for me, the studio, man, like, that's forever. Like, that's writing in pen. It's writing in blood or ink or whatever you want to do. I mean, live, it's like you're kind of making a sandcastle. Like, the thing's going to get swept away by the tide at some point. And there's something beautiful to that as well. Don't get me wrong. But for me, just how I think I need it to be in stone, if that makes sense. So that's kind of just my passion of it. That's why I love what I do. And I love the ability to sit in the studio and create in front of you guys. Well, I'm Will, and this has been Will the Artist. I appreciate you watching. It would really help me out if you clicked on that like and subscribe button. There's also a video right here that is part 4 for this little mini series of me creating this beat, or whatever we're calling it. I guess we're calling it a beat. And I appreciate that you got this far. Throw me a like, subscribe. It goes a long way. Really not that hard. If you feel like commenting, I'll definitely get back to you in the comments. Thanks so much. I'm Will. This has been Will the Artist. Have a good one.